welcome to this special edition of Vantage. We are coming to you live from the White House. Come January, it will have a new resident, Donald J. Trump. He's won the election. He's swept the swing states. He will become the 47th President of the United States of America. When we arrived here last week, there was a feeling of tension and fervor. Washington, D.C. was uncertain. No one knew which way the election would go and what the end result would look like. So the U.S. Capitol prepped up for all outcomes. We took a walk around the city to see how it prepared for election day. Welcome to Washington, D.C. Just a couple of days until this town gets a new chief. Or rather, a commander-in-chief. Elections usually bring excitement and energy, a feeling of change and hope. But around here, the mood is a bit different. Yes, people are concerned about the results, but they're more concerned about what happens after. This is the Capitol Hill. You may remember what happened here the last time. Hundreds of Trump supporters breached security and stormed this building. They were refusing to accept that Donald Trump had lost the election. So senators and members of Congress had to be rushed to safe rooms and bunkers. Now we have another election involving Donald Trump, and everyone has the same question on their mind. If he loses, will there be another attack? Authorities are working to ensure that doesn't happen. For starters, security has been increased.
You in?
Most of the popular protest sites have been fenced. Nearly 2,100 officers have been deployed. That's 300 more than January 2021. The hope is any fallout will be contained. Near the White House, similar arrangements are in place. The Lafayette Park is partially closed. So are the sidewalks near the White House. Officials are not taking any chances. They want constitutional centers to be safe in case things go south. Washington's governor is also on the job. He has activated some of the National Guards. Think of them as paramilitary forces. Each US state has National Guards stationed inside, sort of like backup for the army. In Washington, these troops have been put on standby. All that security may sound good on paper, but it only adds to the worries for the residents of the city. They got a taste of the violence in 2017 when Donald Trump was inaugurated as president. Hundreds of people took over Washington to the chants of "Not my president." Then they got the shock of their lives in 2021 when the Capitol riots happened. And now the people of Washington say that they're scared and nervous. A lot of businesses have boarded up their storefronts, fearing riots or violent protests. These are the people at the forefront of America's political divide. If the election is close, things may turn worse. Chances are candidates will approach the Supreme Court, another institution based in Washington. A legal battle is likely to bring a flood of supporters from both sides. A scenario that doesn't read well. Any violence will affect the locals in many ways. Their businesses are on the firing line. Roads may get closed, schools and offices could be shut, and police presence could turn the city into a fortress.
It's a sad state for the democracy in the United States. Why should freedom have to protect your own property when you disagree with somebody? Doesn't make any sense.
We all knows what happened when things doesn't go Trump's way. He incites his followers to protest in violent ways, and I think it's smart. I actually work a couple of blocks down in a government building, and I don't want to come to work on Tuesday. I think it's going to be hectic and crazy. I wish we would be off.
For officials, this is a tough choice. You can't stop supporters from holding peaceful protests. But how do you ensure the situation does not descend into chaos? This is the National Mall. This is the long shot of Washington, D.C. that you see in most Hollywood films. And these are the grounds where some of this country's historic protests and campaigns have unfolded. This place is open to peaceful demonstrations, but you need permission first. So far, at least 9 groups have applied, most of them left-leaning. And this is where the authorities face a dilemma. Do you give permission to opposing groups and risk a face-off? And if you deny permission to all, are you trampling on their right to protest? There are no easy choices as election day nears. Even afterwards, the danger isn't over. In the last election, the anger did not spill over immediately. It exploded weeks later on January 6th. So next week is merely the first in a series of challenges. The eyes of the world will be on Washington, D.C. The international press is here watching. The question is, what will we see? A peaceful transition of power or another crack in the foundation of US democracy? So the city was all prepped. But what about its residents? Who were they voting for? We talked to a lot of people, women rallying for abortion rights, immigrants, Arab Americans and Indian Americans, all to gauge what the voter sentiment was like. Listen to what each one of them had to say. Abortion rights. They've always been a point of contention in US politics. But this year, they're at the forefront. This is the first US presidential election since the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade. Women in America lost their national right to abortion. They lost the right over their own bodies.
My body, my choice!
And now they're out on the streets to fight for it. For millions of voters, reproductive rights could determine the next president of the United States. And they're making themselves seen and heard. This is Washington, D.C., the national capital and the center of all the political action. This is where hundreds of women have gathered for a march to rally for abortion rights. We are in the American capital where hundreds of feminists and reproductive rights activists have gathered just days before the election. This event is strategically timed along with the nationwide Get Out the Vote efforts. It's a powerful reminder of what's at stake in this election. To understand why abortion rights are such a pivotal issue today, we need to go back in history. In 1973, the US Supreme Court gave a landmark ruling in a case called Roe versus Wade. It granted American women the constitutional right to abortion. But nearly 50 years later, in 2022, the Supreme Court overturned that precedent. So abortion was no longer a national right in the US. The power to regulate women's choices was back in the hands of individual states. Now, each state can decide whether women can abort unwanted pregnancies, at what stage, and under what conditions. Basically, access to abortion now depends on where you are in America. For example, here in Washington, D.C., abortion is allowed in all stages of pregnancy. But in Texas, it is illegal unless you are dying. So far, 17 American states have outlawed abortion. Some have very narrow exceptions. Like only in cases of rape, incest, or if a person's life is in danger. 8 other states allow limited access to the procedure. This is despite the fact that nearly 66% Americans support complete legal access to abortion.
Since 2016, we've been telling folks that this is the most consequential election of your lifetime, and each year it's been true, whether it's 2018, 2020, 2022, and more than ever in 2024, we are voting on freedom or fascism, and there's really no middle ground.
We got to stand up for democracy. We have to stand up for a woman's right to have control over her body, control over her life. Women's rights are human rights, and we were back in the hallways.
Which brings us to the presidential race. Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. Support for abortion rights will benefit the Democrats. Harris has been quite vocal about the issue. She has vowed to protect women's rights if elected. But She was part of the administration which was in power when Roe versus Wade was overturned. Her predecessor, Joe Biden himself, has not been as vocal about the issue because of his Catholic background. So critics question if Harris will be different. Meanwhile, Donald Trump appointed the 3 Supreme Court justices who played a crucial role in overturning Roe versus Wade. He also supports the idea of US states governing abortion. Although in the last few months he seems to have softened his stance. He called himself the father of IVF, that's in vitro fertilization. He also said that he would not push for a national abortion ban as president. As activists prepare to march past the White House today, their message is clear. They're watching. They want action from the next administration, from those in power. In fact, this is more than just a march, they say. This is a demand for accountability and a call for the next government to prioritize reproductive rights. With the presidential race deadlocked, abortion rights could be the deciding factor in crucial swing states. These are the 7 states that will decide who becomes president. Many activists here fear another Trump presidency and support Kamala Harris. But this may not translate into as many votes as the Democrats had expected.
I'm terrified. I'm terrified as to what's going to happen to this country and women's rights. This is the most election in our country's history, and I think a lot of Americans don't realize that. What's at stake?
A lot has changed in the United States since 2020, but everything has changed for the women of America. Abortion rights have become one of the most polarizing issues of this election. For women under 30, it's even more important than inflation, they say. So this march, right before the US presidential election, is a reminder that the fight for these women is not just political, it's also personal. It's the final day of campaigning in Tacoma Park. The city council election is in full swing, and candidate Ambriose Agose is going old school. With pamphlets in hand, he is going door to door in the hope of winning over the last remaining undecided voters.
All type of community are supporting me: white, African, Black American, Indian, Spanish. Yes, I have all those communities supporting me.
Agose's campaign materials reflect his wide outreach. They are printed in several languages, including English, Spanish, and French, even Hindi. That's because he's not just seeking the votes of Americans, he is appealing to people from all parts of the world who live here, even illegally. This is Tacoma Park, a city in the US state of Maryland. This is on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. And Tacoma Park is unique because it allows non-US citizens to vote in local city-level elections. This is both legal US residents and illegal immigrants. They're all allowed to vote, and this is a right that was given to them way back in 1993. The idea was to involve all people in local decision-making and planning. Tacoma Park has been a sanctuary city for migrants since 1985. For decades, it has provided refuge to migrants of all kinds. Today, about 30% of the city's population is made up of migrants. Agose is aiming to win their support. He is running to represent Ward 6, where many migrants and non-citizens live. Agose says, even without citizenship, they must have a vote.
People who live here, they contribute building the city. So when it comes to the election, to give them chance also to express their voice.
A lot of Americans do not agree with this view, especially the Republicans and their leader Donald Trump. They believe, and perhaps rightly so, that allowing non-citizens to vote is a dangerous trend. Trump aims to abolish the idea of sanctuary cities altogether, and the Republican Party has been pushing for legislation to ensure this. Republicans like House Speaker Mike Johnson say that the non-citizen voting process is a clear and present danger. Why? Because they fear that this could ultimately change the makeup of the US Congress. Republicans have tried to bring in laws that restrict non-citizens from elections. Bills have been introduced in the US Congress that require proof of citizenship before you register to vote. and restrict federal funding to cities like Tacoma Park. In fact, earlier this year, they also blocked a law that allowed non-citizens to vote in local elections in DC. Immigration was already a hot-button issue in this election. The idea of allowing non-citizens to vote has only intensified the debate. The concept itself is not new, though. Only a few cities allow non-citizens to vote, that too in just local elections. The turnout too remains extremely low, because illegal immigrants tend to not want to attract attention by turning up to vote. Yet, there have been cases of fraud. In Michigan, which is a battleground state, a Chinese student pretended to be a US citizen. He successfully cast a vote in the presidential election. Observers say such cases are rare. But in close polls where every vote counts, no side wants to take chances. Also, immigration has become a point of contention for American voters. 3 out of 5 Americans say it's a key issue. Some accuse illegal immigrants of taking away jobs. Others say immigrants use welfare services and unfairly take away American taxpayer money. There are also safety concerns. Migrants are accused of being criminals and of smuggling drugs into the country. Donald Trump has capitalized on this anti-immigrant sentiment. Trump says that November 5th will be Liberation Day if he is elected. He plans to crack down on illegal immigrants. He is pushing for mass deportations.
On day one, I will launch the largest deportation program of criminals in American history. It's going to be the largest deportation of criminals. We're going to get them out of here fast.
Trump wants to deport about 15 to 20 million illegal immigrants using a law from 1798 called the Alien Enemies Act. Reports show that 88% of all Republicans support this. They support mass deportations. Obviously, this has immigrants concerned.
A lot of us are scared because Trump says the first to be deported will be the Venezuelans. Understand?
Every 4 years it's terrifying. Of having the knowledge, of having to know where the ICE detention is. So if my husband gets taken, I know where to go, because it's terrifying having to tell my kids why we're voting a certain way, because those elections are so important of where their dad is, where their dad's status could end up.
The issue of immigration in America is too big for either party to ignore. Both Republicans and Democrats are promising to reduce the flow of illegal immigrants, but neither side has presented a concrete plan to fix the problem. Involving illegal immigrants in the democratic process and giving them the right to vote only complicates things further. It's crunch time for American voters. They're heading out to elect their next president. We can guess what's on their mind as they queue up. Maybe abortion or inflation or healthcare. But for some voters, it's a war being fought thousands of kilometers away. Israel's war on Gaza. Arabs and Jews are influential blocs in America. There are 3.7 million Arab Americans and 5.8 million Jewish Americans. In an election of close margins, their support is crucial. Yes, domestic issues matter to them, but so does the war in West Asia, especially to Arab Americans who feel that Joe Biden is enabling Israel. You may wonder, what can Biden do? Doesn't the responsibility lie with Israel? Well, on paper, yes, it does. But do remember, American presidents have a lot of leverage over Israel. In the past, they've brokered peace deals between Israel and the Arab world. It was right here in these White House lawns that in the 1990s, then President Bill Clinton hosted the leaders of Israel and Palestine. It was also here that Donald Trump brokered the Abraham Accords. So the voters have a legitimate question in their minds. If those presidents could do it, why not Joe Biden? Arab Americans have traditionally voted for Democrats, but maybe not this time. Polls say 42% of them back Donald Trump, only 41% back Kamala Harris. Here at the Islamic Center in Washington, that shift is clear. This is among the oldest mosques in the city. Opened way back in 1952 by then-President Eisenhower. Amid Washington's Greco-Roman cityscape, this traditional Mamluk style stands out. Years ago, these worshippers would have voted for Democrats, but not anymore.
Americans have been in a gridlock for decades, and they keep thinking that the Democrats are going to save them. We were pushed to vote for Biden in 2020, and look what he did. He's the one perpetrating the genocide. So for the record, the Gazan genocide will go down in history as being under Democratic leadership and not Republican leadership.
I have found that President Trump has been slightly more effective in reaching Muslim and Arab leaders. He's been a little bit more doubtful about pursuing war and pursuing more violent approaches to these kinds of problems.
It's not as much about liking Trump, it's more about punishing the Democrats. But Trump will take it. In some of the swing states, Arab vote could be crucial. Perhaps the difference between winning and losing, like Michigan, for instance. The state is home to more than 200,000 Arab Americans. Trump won it by 10,000 votes in 2016. He lost it by 150,000 votes in 2020. This time again, he senses an opportunity. Days before voting, Trump visited Dearborn in Michigan, often called the Arab capital of America. And his message there, that he will end the war.
We're going to bring peace. You're going to have peace in the Middle East, but not with the clowns that you have running the U.S. right now. You're going to have peace. You're going to have peace in the Middle East.
So Trump is making inroads among Arabs. What about Jews? They too have traditionally voted for Democrats. This is the Sixth and I Synagogue in Washington, D.C., among the oldest in the city. It was inaugurated way back in 1908. Then in the year 2005, the 43rd President of the US, George Bush, attended a special dinner here. A year before that, he'd made minor inroads into the Jewish vote bank, which was until then considered impossible for a Republican candidate to do. Now, almost a decade later, Donald Trump is pulling out all the stops. He says that Kamala Harris is anti-Jew, even though she's married to one. He has met the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at his home in Florida. As president, he moved the US Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. But despite all these efforts, he's not getting much success. Surveys say that 71%, more than 71% Jews in swing states say that they will vote Harris. Many people have speculated why this happens. Republicans support Israel to the hilt, yet Jews back Democrats. Some say it's because Jews feel closer to democratic liberal values. Others point to neo-Nazis in Trump's camp. Anti-Semitism has risen 360% since the Hamas attack last year. So American Jews are rightly worried. In 2020, they put Joe Biden over the line. They helped him win. In the key swing state of Pennsylvania, there are 300,000 Jews. Biden won the state by just 82,000 votes. In 2016, Trump won by just 44,000 votes. So both these communities matter. If you look at the top issues in this election, it's abortion or inflation or democracy. But these alone will not determine the outcome. A few thousand Arab or Jewish votes could put Kamala Harris or Donald Trump in the White House. The Arab voters want to punish the Democrats for supporting Israel, and the Jewish voters continue to support the Democrats despite Donald Trump's outreach. So in a lot of ways, Joe Biden's shadow looms large over this election, even though he's pulled out. His failures have alienated the Arab voters, and Kamala Harris may end up paying the price for it. Millions of Indians have made their way to America over the decades. They have made a name for themselves in the business and tech world. Indian Americans are often called the model minority. But this election season, they're also being seen through another lens. They are being seen as a crucial voting bloc, one with the power to influence the final outcome in the presidential race. We are in Fairfax County in the state of Virginia. This is part of the greater Washington area. It's America's national capital region. Now, Fairfax is one of the richest regions in the US, and it is home to a large number of Indian immigrants. Some 32,000 Indian Americans live in Fairfax. They make up almost 3% of the population. And in an election as close as this one, 3% can make all the difference. Indian immigrants have made an economic mark in Fairfax over the years. On average, they are better educated and wealthier than any other immigrant group. They're even doing better than US-born citizens. Indian immigrants have a higher rate of home ownership and more incorporated businesses than any other demographic in Fairfax. So you can say that they've been a dominant economic force for a while. And that's the case across most of the US. But now, along with economic power, Indian immigrants also have political power. There are about 5.2 million Indian Americans. This includes both first-generation immigrants and their descendants. About 2.6 million Indian Americans are eligible to vote in this election, and both major parties are vying for their vote. Donald Trump recently put out this tweet on Diwali. Look at the points he's raising. Trump basically says that he's the best man for Hindus, and so Hindu Americans should vote for him. Not all Indian Americans are Hindus, of course, but they are in the majority. So this is a pitch for most of the Indian American vote. Kamala Harris tried to capitalize on Diwali as well, putting out this video to make one last appeal to Indian Americans. Over the course of this presidential campaign, the Democrats have tried their best to capture the Indian American vote. They've been canvassing for months, using slogans like Desis Decide or Desis Vote. The Democrats have been active in all the swing states in particular.
You can make the difference in this election. Please sign up with Indian American Impact. You can go to desipresident.com. Sign up right now to get engaged. Let's win this election.
The registration site is desipresident.com, a not-so-subtle highlighting of Kamala Harris's ethnicity. The Democrats have also roped in prominent Indian American celebrities, like former Top Chef host Padma Lakshmi, who campaigned door-to-door in Pennsylvania. It was an all-out blitz by the Democratic Party. But despite all this effort, they've been bleeding Indian American votes. A nationwide survey of Indian Americans was conducted recently in the weeks leading up to the election, and the results are disappointing for Democrats. Indian Americans have historically leaned towards the Democratic Party, but the new survey shows a slight shift towards Donald Trump. In the 2020 election, 68% of Indian Americans said they would vote Democrat for Joe Biden. Only 22% said they would vote for Trump. This time, the gap has reduced. About 60% say they would vote for Harris. That's a significant increase for the Republicans. And in such a close race, it could power them to the White House. Indian Americans have historically leaned towards the Democrats. Most of them still do. But of late, Donald Trump and the Republicans have made some gains. And the biggest reason for that is illegal immigration. Take the example of Fairfax County. It is home to a lot of Indian immigrants. Most of them came here legally, and they've had to wait for years for their citizenship papers to be processed. Some of them are still waiting. So they're upset. The people who came to America legally, they're upset with the Democrats for failing to control the borders. Illegal immigration was rampant for the last 3 years. Tens of thousands were crossing the border every month and getting benefits that legal migrants had to wait years for. This turned some immigrant communities against the Democrats. Some Indian Americans too. They believe that Donald Trump is the better choice when it comes to securing America's southern border, which is why thousands of Indian Americans will be voting Republican for the first time. Will this prove to be Kamala Harris's undoing? We'll find out in a few hours. And what is an election without some merchandise? From MAGA hats to Harris pins, T-shirts, flags, Washington was full of such memorabilia. They may reflect the spirit of American voters, but the truth is most of them are not even made in America. They're made in China. We'll tell you why. Pins, posters, flags. Even these iconic Make America Great Again hats. Merchandise like these are a staple of the US presidential elections. Campaigns sell them, supporters buy them. But these items aren't just pieces of memorabilia. They're often seen as indicators of who is winning the election. Here in the United States, elections aren't just decided by votes. They're also decided by what I'm holding here. This is political merchandise, badges for Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. These serve as symbols of political allegiance and a public display of candidate support. But can the sales of these products alone determine the outcome of an election? Let's find out.
And make America great again.
Over the years, campaign merchandise has become a strategic tool. Surveys say 70% people buy political merch to influence others. 68% believe that buying it can affect election outcomes. Stores that sell merchandise agree with this. Reports say merchandise sales got it right 9 out of 11 times, meaning in 9 out of the last 11 elections, the candidate who sold more merchandise won. And which were the two exceptions? The year 2000 and 2016. Both these elections had something in common. The candidate with a popular vote lost. Experts say there is no correlation between sales and election results though. But in a battle as close as this one, it's hard to ignore how merch has become a measure of political momentum. The question then is, who has the momentum? Who is winning in terms of merchandise sales? On Amazon, it is Donald Trump. His merch sales are outperforming Kamala Harris's by a wide margin, almost by 5 times. For every piece of Harris merchandise being sold, there are 5 of Donald Trump. It's a staggering lead. Also because Trump has been longer in this race. Since the beginning of this year, Trump merchandise worth $140 million has been sold. Harris entered the picture only a few months ago. She sold items worth around $26 million. But here's the twist in the tale. The merchandise that's meant to be a symbol of belonging is also proof of America's dependence on China. The hats that say, "Make America Great Again," are making Chinese manufacturers bigger. And this is ironic, especially for candidates advocating Buy American policies. The soaring sales are fueling Chinese businesses. Chinese traders are pumping more and more merchandise into the American markets with the help of e-commerce websites. And they're finding millions of takers. That's because their products are cheap. Take the MAGA hat, for example. The Trump website sells it for $40. Chinese traders sell it for $4. That's 10 times lower. Same for Harris merchandise. Kamala hats on the campaign website sell for $47. On China's Temu, they sell for less than $3. That makes Chinese goods an obvious choice for most Americans. Look at this Trump hat. It says, "President Trump Save America." But this hat is made in China. And this is the Chinese interference that Americans must be investigating in this election, I guess. But Chinese or American, merchandise sales is a good reflection of voter enthusiasm, although experts caution against reading too much into it, because polling and other traditional methods remain the foundation of election predictions, and even they get it wrong way too often. So it may not predict the results. It may not even be made in America. But campaign merchandise does tell a story. It reflects the spirit of American elections. Which brings us to the election day. Voters were lining up to elect their next president, so we headed to a polling booth to see how the whole process plays out. It's election day in the US, November 5th, Tuesday, and we are at a polling station. This is what a typical polling station looks like. This one is a middle school. It's called Hardy Middle School. Like we see in India, most polling stations in the US are also ad hoc. They're either schools or community centers or libraries. But that's where the similarity ends, because in India we have one body called the Election Commission that conducts all the elections across the country. In the US that is not the case. It's local bodies, local authorities that conduct elections in every state, and we've been speaking to election observers and election officials, and they say that the experience is different for every state and for every polling booth. It's completely different. We went inside. You're not allowed to film inside a polling station, but we saw how it is done. A typical voter has a choice. They can either vote electronically or they can use the paper ballot. All of the counting happens together, both electronic votes and the paper votes. And a voter has to register. This is a typical citizen voter registration form where you have to give your details, your address, etc. You can also declare your affiliation, political affiliation, and declare if you want to whether you support the Republican Party or the Democratic Party or an independent. So that is up to you. And we saw that first-time voters, when they cast their vote, there was a round of applause. So the mood inside is quite upbeat. This is what a paper ballot typically looks like. You see this one, this has the presidential candidates. These are the presidential candidates in Washington, D.C. This number is also going to change depending on which state you're in. So in some states there are more. In Virginia, for instance, there are 6 candidates contesting the presidential election. In Washington, D.C. it's 3. And there are elections for local bodies as well, District of Columbia, federal election, district election, and this goes on, and you have to tick mark your choice for each. Like we've been telling you, that this is not just a presidential election that they're conducting. There is an election for the House of Representatives, for senators, for governors, for mayors. So a lot of races are going to be decided today. Still a few hours to go before polling closes here in Washington, D.C. and we're hoping that the results or the trends start coming out later in the day. We'll be keeping track of all of that for you. Remember, more than 80 million people have already voted early. A similar number is expected to come out on voting day. Typically, the turnout is not very high in the US, somewhere between 50 and 60%. Last election was an exception with 66% voter turnout. We'll have to wait and see what this one looks like. Once the polls close, it's a waiting game. The candidates were both at different places. Donald Trump was at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris was here in Washington, D.C. at Harvard University, her alma mater. We are at Harvard University, the alma mater of Kamala Harris. She graduated from here in 1986, and she's going to watch the election results from here. So you can see the excitement in the build-up to the result declaration. Students are gathering here. Classes were cancelled today to allow them to be able to vote. You see a very big media presence as well. The mood is celebratory. People are upbeat and they're confident that Kamala Harris will pull it off this time. The early results have also started pouring in. 14 states have been called so far. These are the first results that have come out. Donald Trump is leading with 95 votes. Kamala Harris is at 35, but remember, these are early numbers and these are all on expected lines. The key battles will be the ones in the swing states, the 7 swing states that we've been telling you about. Trump so far has taken Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, Florida for the 3rd time, Alabama, Missouri, Oklahoma and Tennessee. Harris has got Vermont, District of Columbia, where we are, Maryland and Massachusetts. The turnout also interestingly is quite high. As we've reported earlier, more than 80 million voters cast early ballots. That is quite a big number. Even in in-person voting, we are seeing a big surge in some of the battleground states. So that can tell you something about the voter mood and how people are enthused and they want to make a point and make their vote count. Georgia, interestingly, has come out with an exit poll on Georgia, in fact, which says that independents prefer Trump. Now, Georgia is a key state, some 16 electoral votes here, and one of the first to close voting at 7 p.m. EST. Georgia was among the first to have closed polling. Donald Trump has also made a last-minute appeal telling his supporters that if you're there in the line, don't leave.
Our Republicans, we're doing really well. If you're in line, stay in line. Don't let them take you off that line. vote. Stay on the line. They can't do anything about it, and vote. We're going to win it big. Thank you.
They cannot make you leave. Go and cast your vote. So every vote counts. That is how close this race is shaping up to be. The United States has 538 electoral college votes. You need 270 to become president. And Donald Trump got to the magic number pretty fast. Networks swiftly called states, but Pennsylvania ended the suspense. It's the most crucial battleground state, the state with 19 votes. And once it was called for Trump, it was game over for the Democrats. What a day it's been. It started with long queues outside polling stations. It's ended with the numbers coming in. Most estimates said that it could take much longer, maybe even days, for the results to be called. But as it turned out, as the night progressed, numbers came in thick and fast, and Donald Trump was soon declared the winner. He has won this US presidential election. Like we've been telling you, it's media houses that call election results in the United States. Fox was the first one to say that Trump has crossed the magic number, the 270 mark. We have the CNN projection. It gives 187 seats to Kamala Harris and 265 to Donald Trump. AP, Associated Press, 112 seats to Kamala Harris, 198 seats to Donald Trump. But it was the swing state of Pennsylvania that really tilted the balance in Trump's favor. When Pennsylvania went to Trump, when it was called in Trump's favor with its 19 electoral college votes, that is when it was seen as a Trump victory. In fact, Trump was quick to take credit for the win. He did not wait for a concession from the other side, from the Harris camp, which is typically the norm. He went ahead and said that he has won this election. He's called it a historic comeback. He's made a speech along with J.D. Vance, Trump claiming that his team may breach the 315 mark. We are still waiting to see if that happens. Interestingly, Donald Trump this time has also won the popular vote, which was not the case in the 2016 election. So it is a resounding win for Donald Trump and his team. Republicans now control the Senate as well. And interestingly, in that speech, Trump also made a mention of Elon Musk, saying a new star is born, and that is Elon. J.D. Vance, his running mate, saying that we witnessed the greatest political comeback in U.S. history. As the numbers came in thick and fast, leaders from across the world wasted no time in congratulating Donald Trump on social media platform X, including Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the French President Emmanuel Macron. We've heard from Viktor Orban, we've heard from Anthony Albanese, Keir Starmer of the United Kingdom, Giorgia Meloni. They've all gone ahead and congratulated Trump on his electoral victory and said that they hope that their two countries can work together in the future with the Americans, of course. So this is what things look like at the moment. Some counting is still on, but by all accounts, Donald Trump is the winner, and he is going to be the occupant of the building behind me. That is the White House, still boarded up, still fenced up, as security measures are still very much in place. We are surrounded by police officers and a big press contingent that has been up all night looking at the numbers coming in. This is what we have in terms of the latest from Washington, D.C. Donald Trump is going to be the next president of the United States of America. So Trump is going to be president. He will take oath on 20th January next year. There is still time left for the inauguration. What will his next few weeks look like? When will he come to Washington, D.C., and what happens after that? This is home base for Donald Trump, his residence in Florida's Mar-a-Lago resort. This is where he plotted his comeback, where he hosted foreign dignitaries, and where he watched his election triumph on Wednesday. A media contingent is camping across the shore. Patrol boats are also on alert. After all, this isn't just a former president's home. It's also the next president's home. Trump will not be here beyond January. He's got a busy couple of weeks ahead. First, a visit to the White House. Joe Biden has already extended an invite. It's only a question of when the visit happens. As per tradition, the incumbent president hosts the incoming leader at the White House. In 2020, Donald Trump skipped that tradition, but in 2016, he was hosted by Barack Obama to what turned out to be an awkward meeting. expect animosity to hang in the air because Donald Trump will be hosted by two of his presidential rivals, Joe Biden, who defeated him in 2020, and Kamala Harris, whom he defeated this year. Away from Washington, the transfer of power begins. December 17th is the first step. State electors will meet in respective state capitals. These electors make up the Electoral College. For example, Texas has 40 Electoral College votes, meaning they have 40 state electors. All of them will cast their vote for the candidate who won that state. In this case, Donald Trump. This exercise happens in every state, after which these votes are transferred to Washington, D.C. It reaches here on the 25th of December. The next step happens right here at the U.S. Capitol. The state electoral college votes are counted and certified by a joint session of Congress. The Vice President conducts this proceeding and certifies the election. In this case, Trump's rival, Kamala Harris. This is usually a routine event in the transition of power, but this time it has been declared a national security event. Why? Because of what happened the last time when Trump supporters tried to overturn the certification process. Something tells us that won't be happening this time. After that, it's a countdown to inauguration. Trump will be quite busy on these days. He must pick political appointees, select cabinet members, receive daily presidential briefs, basically set up an entirely new administration. Chances are he will do that from Florida, from his Mar-a-Lago home.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President-elect of the United States, Donald John Trump.
Then, on January 20th, comes the big day. Trump's second inauguration. He will return to Washington, D.C. ahead of that. This is Blair House, the white building that you see behind me. This is the official presidential guest house, and it is tradition that the president-elect spends the night here before Inauguration Day. Joe Biden and his wife Jill did that on January 19th before his inauguration. And in 2017, Donald Trump also stayed at the Blair House before his inauguration. There was a lot of speculation that he might prefer a hotel, but he ended up staying here finally. Let's see if he sticks to that tradition this time. This is Trump's second time on this ride. Last time, he visited a church on Inauguration Day, after which he headed to the White House. The president and the president-elect ride together from there to the Capitol Hill. They will use the presidential limousine, the Beast, a car that Trump used just 4 years ago. And this is where the inauguration happens, on the west front of the US Capitol. The public can get free tickets from members of Congress. Usually inaugurations are attended by all former presidents and first ladies. The president-elect takes his oath of office on top of those stairs. Trump used 2 Bibles to take his oath the last time. One was his own, the other belonged to Abraham Lincoln.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
After the inauguration, the new president sees off the outgoing leader. The Bidens will get one final ride on Air Force One. And the destination? Anywhere you pick. Once Biden leaves, it's the Trump show. He will first attend a luncheon at the US Capitol. There he will sign nominations and maybe even executive orders. After that, Trump will inspect military troops from the Capitol building. And then it's back to the White House. Ceremonial military regiments, citizens' groups, marching bands, all of them lead the president and the first lady to the White House. They walk through Pennsylvania Avenue, often surrounded by hundreds of supporters who line the streets. All those traditions and steps bring us back here to the White House. Donald Trump will be back in the presidential limousine, the Beast. The motorcade will drive him from the US Capitol to the presidential mansion behind me, and thus another American presidency will begin. For Donald Trump, his second one. And that's all that we have for you on our special coverage of the US elections. We'll be back to the studios next week, so stay tuned to Firstpost.